All right, as I said before, I just want to express my appreciation and gratitude to those who, of the kindness of their hearts, do donate to this channel, and it's much appreciated. KabbalahDecoded.com is the website, and anyone who wants to participate is possible over there, and also at buymeacoffee/Kabbalah Decoded. In any event, tonight the topic is a continuation of this theme that we've been talking about, which is essentially the theme of tikkun. First, we spoke about the what was essentially the shvira, when things break apart, chaos, spiritual chaos, and not only spiritual, but even the world of chaos, physical chaos, chaos in every way, shape, and form that one can imagine. Of course, we didn't go into all of them because it's not worth it, but there's the root of chaos we did try to discuss. In any event, we've been discussing tikkun for a while, and the concept of tikkun extends into every area and more than the concept of chaos, of tohu, of shvir, of breaking, of chaotic existence, because there's some aspects that have been rectified before this existence came into being. That's the world, for example, the world of Atzilut. As everybody knows by now, I'm sure, there are four worlds, four immanent worlds, and one meta world. The four immanent worlds are the world of Asiya, the world of Yetzirah, the world of Bria, the world of Atzilut, which is the world of godliness, essentially. And then there's a transcendent world, which is called the world of Adam Kadmon. Okay. Most of the tikkun that needs to be done is in the world of Asiya and Yetzirah, and even to a certain extent in Bria, but not nearly to the same extent as in the worlds of Asiya and Yetzirah, the two lowest worlds. But without going into all the technicalities right now, I want to focus on the approach of the Ba'al Shem Tov to the concept of tikkun as it involves health and healing. Now I'm going to read, or rather translate, from a very brief remark that the Ba'al Shem Tov made, and it is based on the first verse in the book of Leviticus, the first verse in Vayikra. In fact, the first word of the first verse. The first word is the word Vayikra, which means God called to Moses. He called out to Moses. And then he gave him all sorts of instructions having to do with sacrifices or offerings, which are essentially, the offerings were in temple times, was a very straightforward way of rectifying things which had gotten out of sync. Some people like to call it sin, but in Kabbalistic terminology, and particularly in the Hasidic branch of Kabbalistic terminology, the word chet, which is usually translated as sin, is explained as something akin to missing the target. Lahachti, if a person shoots at a target and he misses, it's called lahachti et matara, to miss the target. So therefore, what people normally call sin is, in general, just you're off the mark. You're aiming in the wrong direction, or maybe you're even aiming in the right direction, but you didn't quite hit the target. So it's something that, in other words, what you would call sin, or what you would call a situation that needs tikkun, that needs rectification, is a situation where things are out of sync, where your aim, or maybe theoretically your aim is correct, but where your arrow, so to speak, is pointing is not exactly on target. It's off target, and therefore it has to be rectified. And the word, the word for sacrifices, the offerings, the sacrifices that are spoken about throughout the book of Leviticus, are these sacrifices are called a korban, korban, which means an offering or a sacrifice. That's the way it's usually translated. But the deeper meaning of korban is from the word karov. Karov means to bring close to. In other words, when a person is out of sync, what he needs is to be brought closer. He needs to be brought closer to the target, or to be brought closer to the proper path to get to the target. And that is essentially what the Ba'al Shem Tov is going to teach in this particular um, teaching. So he says like this: that the first word, again, the first word of this of the book of Leviticus is the word vayikra, which means to call out to. Now, I'll draw a I'll show it to you on a whiteboard soon, but be aware that the vast majority of the vast majority of the Hebrew Bible is written on parchment. It's written in Hebrew letters in a certain script called Ktav Ashuri, sort of square script. We discussed that a little bit last week, the concept of the letters. But the vast majority of the Torah is written, the Torah being the Bible, scripture is written in medium-sized letters. However, there's an entire alphabet of larger than normal letters. For instance, the first letter of the word, of the first letter that begins the Torah, that begins the 5 books of Moses, is the letter Bet. Let me just draw this on a, so you'll be able to see it more clearly. Is the letter Bet from the word Bereshit. Bereshit meaning in the beginning, right? So that letter Bet is larger than most letters would be, right? Normally a Bet would be written, let's say, this size, and this is written much larger. So you have an entire alphabet right throughout Scripture. Not only they're not all of the letters are in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses itself, but throughout the writings of the prophets and so on and so forth. All 24 books of the Tanakh. The Tanakh means Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the 5 books of Moses, the books of the prophets, and the writings. The writings including Psalms and Song of Songs and things like that. So all throughout, there's altogether one alphabet of larger letters that are larger than normal. And there's also an alphabet of letters that are smaller than normal, right? Like the small letter is probably less than half the size of a big letter. Okay, so it's an entire alphabet. Now, why is that? And sometimes it's just in the middle of a word. It's not because the word starts off with a bigger letter, and like they do in printing and things like that, to make it to sort of to emphasize the beginning of something. No, sometimes it's in the middle of a word. Sometimes the end, the last letter in the word, that's the smallest letter. So why is it, and what do these represent? Now, the letter that we're going to be looking at is the letter which is called the letter aleph. That's the first, that's the first, let me just clear the drawing so that you'll see it a little bit better. All right, that's the letter aleph, is written sort of like this, right? That's the letter aleph. And when it's written actually in script, it's written like this. That's a letter Yud, and then there's a reverse letter Yud over here, right? The letter Yud, and then there's a line joining the two. So that's the letter Aleph. Now, in the first word of the book of Leviticus is written as follows. It's written Vav Yud Kuf Reish, and then it's written this aleph, right? The aleph is written there. Oop, all right, whatever it is. Not perfect, but the aleph over here is written smaller than all the other letters. It's much smaller than the other letters. And usually when it's written smaller, it's written on a higher, it's written at the top rather than at the bottom of the line, right? It's written at the, like at the top of the line, in other words, commensurate with the tops of the letters over there, and it's written much smaller. So the Baal Shem Tov is focusing on why this aleph is written smaller, what that means, what that comes to teach us. So he says like this. The Baal Shem Tov says as follows, and this is reported by one of his students or student of a student. And he says as follows: the Maran Baal Shem Tov, our master, the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name, said that all healing comes from that letter, from that small aleph, from that small letter of the word Vayikra, of the word he called out to Moses. Vayikra al Moshe, he called out to Moses. Now, what does this mean? So this is what Chesed Gvura is what the Chabad side says. I'm not sure in reference to what that is, but I'm not sure. But Chesed and Gvura is all right. Chesed and Gvura are the two columns of the right and the left. Chesed on the right and Gvura on the left. And when those columns are out of balance, that's when sickness comes. Oh, I see you. Small letters from Gvura, large letters from Chesed. Okay, and the middle letters from the middle-sized letters from Tiferet. That's correct. That is correct. Yes. But what the Baal Shem Tov says is as follows: it's the small letter that brings healing. Now, what did he mean? What did he mean by that? Like, what is the teaching? What is he trying to tell us? So, let me go back to the whiteboard again, and I will have to explain a number of different terms again. All right, the word aleph, the letter aleph, I'm just going to write it in regular modern Hebrew script, which is, that's how it's written. Again, when it's written traditionally, it's written more or less like that, right? But so the letter aleph, which is the numerical value, every letter in the Hebrew alphabet has a numerical value, and the numerical value of aleph is 1. Okay. So, says the Baal Shem Tov, the word choleh meaning sick, ill, the word choleh adds up to 49. Gematria, the numerical value of the letters added together, is a very important clue in Kabbalah to a deeper meaning of things. As we explained a number of different times, there's various levels of interpretation of scripture, of the Torah. One of the modes of interpretation is called remez. In other words, deeper things are hinted to even though they're not fully explained. And one of the methodologies of remez is to use gematria, to use the numerical value of words to understand what is going on. So the Baal Shem Tov says like this: the person who is ill is called a choleh. That's the traditional name for an ill person, choleh. And that adds up to 49. What is he missing? He's missing the 50th level. The 50th level is the level of healing, right? That's called the 50th gate. The 50th gate. The 50th gate is the innermost dimension of bina. There's chokhmah and bina in the sfirot. There's chokhmah on the right column, the head of the right column, and bina, the head of the left column. Chokhmah is called Abba, the father, because we can understand what chokhmah does by understanding the human relationship of a father to a mother and to his children and so on. And bina is called the mother. Now, the depth of the mother of bina actually is higher than the depth of Chokhmah. The origin of both of them is in Keter, but Keter, the crown, but the origin of bina is in a higher level of Keter than the origin of Chokhmah. Right, Chokhmah, the sphere of Chokhmah, its origin is in the aspect of what's called Arich Anpin in Keter, and Bina's source in Keter is called Atik Yomin, Atik or Atik Yomin, Atik, and Atik is a higher level than Arich. Right, that's all on the technical side. Basically, the point being that the source of Bina is in a very high level of Keter. That level of Atik corresponds in the soul to what is called Oneg. Oneg means delight, right? Oneg means delight. That's, in other words, what delight are we talking about? We're talking about God's delight in the world, right? So when, and that's what he wanted. He wanted to create a physical world. Otherwise, he wouldn't have created it in the first place. He wanted a physical world that would reveal godliness. And when the physical world does not reveal godliness, that's when sickness, illness comes about. And part of that has to do with not drawing down oneg. Oneg again meaning delight, divine delight, called oneg, which is why bina, when oneg comes down into this world, it's called simcha. Simcha meaning joy, right? Delight is manifested in the word joy, in simcha, in joy. That's why Em Habanim, the verse says, Em Habanim Smecha, the mother of children delights, or she's joyful, rather. Yeah, the mother of children is joyful. Why? Because she's eliciting oneg. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because the word oneg, actually, most of the time when the word oneg is written in Hebrew, it's actually written without the vav. It's pronounced with a vav in it. I know this is a little bit technical for some people, but it's important to understand because we're going to go a little bit more deeply into this whole concept of oneg. Now, when oneg is out of sync, when it's not what it's supposed to be, when God's delight in the world is not being drawn down, in other words, when he doesn't find pleasure in us, in our actions, in what we are doing, we're making things out of sync, then what happens is this permutation, this formula, this, let's call it algorithm, gets mixed up, it gets messed up. And what happens as a result is what's called nega. Nega means, it's exactly the same letters, but nega means a plague, right? So from delight, when it's in its proper order, comes the plague. When it's not in its proper order, when things get messed up, when things are out of sync, when we're missing the target, that's what causes nega. That's what causes illness, and this can be in a general sense, and it could be in an individual sense as well. In any event, what is the tikkun? So the tikkun is to draw down that 50th gate, that 50th level. That 50th level is in fact the level of keter that we're talking about over here, which is called atik, and its aspect in the soul is called oneg, delight. So one of the first things the Ba'al Shem Tov is explaining, one of the first things that we have to do is we have to delight in God's world and make ourselves delightful at the same time. In other words, the vast majority of people, and this happens to be a very Western thing. People think that you're not a good person if you don't feel guilty, if you don't feel bad about yourself, if you don't feel embarrassed by yourself somehow or another. This is becoming more and more prevalent, and that's exactly the wrong. It's exactly the wrong thing to do. It's exactly 180 degrees the opposite of what you should be doing. What we should be doing is finding delight in the world, finding the source of delight in our own souls, and eliciting that and expressing that and making other people, not making is not the right word, sharing that delight with those around us. You notice that the word delight has the word light in it as well. Yes, it's shining out the light from inside to other people, and that's a delightful thing for the person who's shining the light and for the people who are receiving it. Um, when Moses came down from the mountain after he got the tablets, his face was shining; it was lit up to such an extent that they couldn't even really look at him. So that's the whole concept that we're really talking about over here. We're talking about this concept of drawing it down, but how does it work in terms of healing? All right, so now we have to go a little bit more into the idea behind it. That aspect of the light, that divine delight that we spoke about before, has um, another term for it as well. We can understand a little bit better by using the other term for delight. Let me just answer a question first before we get there. How do we get rid of guilt before everyone can feel the delight? Or is that it? We must be delight so that they get it. Yes, it's hard, but it's not impossible. Let me just tell you a little joke, just to lighten things up a little bit, because I don't want you to feel that. All right. A husband and a wife were having an argument. Ever heard of that before? Husband and wife were having an argument, and the husband says to his wife, "Well, you're supposed to listen to me because God created man first, and only then did He create woman." So the lady says, "Yeah," and that follows the usual principle. God learns from His mistakes. Everyone learns from their mistakes. So there you go. So that's why bina is higher than chokhmah. The root of bina is higher than the root of chokhmah. Bina is a female shira and symbolized by the mother, and Abba chokhmah is the father. Okay, so all right. So just to lighten things up a little bit. So the answer to your question, Ellen, is basically the answer to the question is you can't get rid of guilt. You can't get rid of guilt because that's like trying to drive out, it's an expression, a Hasidic expression, you're trying to drive out the darkness with a stick. It doesn't work. You're trying to push out the darkness with something that's the only way you can push out darkness is by lighting a candle with a light. Yeah, light pushes out darkness. Harshness, sticks, gvura, whatever you want to call it, is not going to get rid of the darkness. The whole concept of guilt cannot be pushed out by feeling guilty about it or by remonstrating with oneself, by accusing yourself of being less than perfect, whatever it is. It doesn't work. What one has to do in order to, well, there's a verse in Song of Songs. Song of Songs is a work which was written by King Solomon. Actually, I just finished doing a commentary of the Zohar on Shira Shirim in English. It's not published yet. It will be published sometime in the future, hopefully. But I have to put an introduction in and so on and so forth. But anyway, the idea, there's a verse over there. It's um, a very interesting verse that says, his left hand, everything in the Song of Songs seems to be sexual. Well, not everything, but a lot of Song of Songs seems to be sexual imagery, and it is. Not just that it seems to be; it is sexual imagery because um, when sexual things are understood in the right context, in other words, they're understood as an analogy for what's called the veikut, cleaving when the soul cleaves to God, or the deepest um, awareness of the divine presence, which that's what the veikut is, uh, then So how do we get to that? That's what Song of Songs is all about. How to get to that deepest level of Dveikut. There's many layers and levels, but it's explained all on a by way of an analogy, mostly to sexual imagery, not overt sexual imagery, but some things like hugging and kissing and so on and so forth. Not anyway. So so there's a verse that says, "His left hand is under my head, and his right arm embraces me." So one of the commentaries on that is, in order for the right arm to embrace me, in other words, in order for us to be embraced by the divine, we first have to lift up our heads. The head has to be lifted up. In other words, we have to start looking at things not from a lowly, negative, dark point of view, but we have to look at our highest potential, our highest possibility, our highest form of light within each one, within each and every one of us, and then we will automatically come to his right arm embraces me. Right? In other words, one has to change one's mindset. Your spiritual paradigm of feeling guilt and feeling negativity and so on and so forth is exactly the wrong thing. It has to be completely the opposite way around. One's thoughts have to be lifted up to the heights of what of our essential creation, what it is that we were created for, and how we were created in terms of being a part of God above. That's the way it's. Yeah, you can be sorry without guilt. Yeah, regret is possible. Yes, I mean one shouldn't wallow in regret. One should not wallow in regret, and but to be sorry for things that you did in the past is an important thing. It's an important part of what's called in Jewish terminology. It's called returning. Tshuva is the word in Hebrew, but it means to return. To return to the way you're supposed to be or the way that you were intended to be. That requires sometimes one has to have the regrets and often very deep regrets. But regrets shouldn't be depression regrets. The regrets should be motivating to really reach into the depths of ourselves to get to the essential core of who we are. And the essential core of who we are is uh, so to speak, a piece of godliness, a piece of God. Yeah, Chelek Olokam Imal, a part of God above. That's the way it's expressed in Tanya. In the second chapter of Tanya, if you want to have a look over there, in the second chapter of Tanya, the famous Hasidic work by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, that the soul is part of God above. Okay, so here comes the concept, says the Ba'al Shem Tov, of tikkun. How does a person affect his own tikkun? And primarily what he was speaking about in this verse, in this explanation of this verse that we started off with about this word vayikra, how does another person effectuate the rectification or the healing of somebody else? That was the primary thing that he was talking about. He was talking to his disciples and he was teaching his disciples how to rectify the soul of somebody else in order to heal their illnesses. And the person who put this book together records a few stories about people that were basically terminally ill, people who were never able to have children, and many other such miraculous cures. So, how did the Baal Shem Tov actually? How did he do that? So, in order to explain that, I'm going to give an analogy. The analogy is, and this is an analogy which, the basics of the analogy are found like right throughout Jewish literature, and particularly in Hasidic literature, and particularly in the writings of the Baal Shem Tov. The analogy to a king who had a son, the prince, and the prince, for some reason or another, sort of wandered off and kind of left his family, and he found himself in a faraway country, in a faraway village, and he started copying the ways of the villagers, and felt a very, very like lowly level, and forgot completely about the fact that he was a prince. This is in fact the story of the soul, that the soul comes down to this world and forgets. The soul forgets that it's a prince or a princess. The soul forgets that. We forget that we're princes and princesses, and we think we're just like the common villagers who do not have the intellect or the understanding to be able to see that they're wrong in their thinking. They're thinking themselves as very lowly creatures, basically not much more than animals on two legs, and this thinking is completely wrong. So the prince starts to think like this, and that's why he thinks about himself. And so the king wants to bring his son back to the palace. What does he do? He sends one of the noblemen, a courtier, a nobleman, to go and encourage the prince to come back. But the prince like doesn't he can't find anything in common with this nobleman or noblewoman, whatever you want to say. And they speak a different language. They can't communicate. Um, so the king then sends someone of even greater importance, because he thinks that the reason that his son didn't come back is because he only sent, maybe a second rank nobleman. It wasn't a first rank, so he sent a first rank. Anyway, to continue the story, this happened several times. He sent several noblemen, more and more important ministers and so on and so forth to try and bring the prince back, until one wise advisor to the king tells him this is not the way to do it. The way to do it is the someone has to go to the king as if he was one of the villagers and talk to him on his level. And in this way, he'll be able to convince him about who he is and where he belongs and why he should come back to the palace. The king says to the wise man, the wise advisor, well, why don't you do it since you understand the issue? And that's what he did. He dressed in the clothing of a villager and sort of an ordinary person. He looked like an ordinary person, and he went and he befriended the prince. And after speaking to the prince at great length for many, many hours and many days and many weeks, eventually he convinced him, and he brought him back to the palace. He re-educated him as to who he really was and where he really belonged. So that's all an analogy, and that's basically what the Ba'al Shem Tov says is the story of healing. You can't necessarily heal a person by pouring down upon them from above. Yes, there's certain people that can do that for sure. There's no question about it. We spoke about that last week. But another way of healing, and perhaps even more effective way, is to understand what it is that the person is missing. In order to be able to understand what it is that he's missing, that person is missing, so you have to get into their shoes, so to speak. You have to get into their shoes. You have to get into their clothes. You have to talk to them on their level. So a great sage is able to understand what that person is missing, where the 50th gate, that person's 50th gate, what it is and why it's missing and where it is. He's able to understand that by descending into that person, into their depth, and understanding what it is that they're missing, and then being able to give it to them. By giving them that 50th gate, that extremely lofty level that the person is missing, that's what rectifies the illness. Now, as we spoke about last week, a very great tzaddik, a very great Kabbalist, is able to do this simply through doing yichudim, through changing the permutations of things and combining various permutations in order to be able to do that. But someone who's not on that level can do it through prayer. And when we're talking about healing, we're also talking about not only through the method of yichudim, of changing permutations, not only through prayer, but through deep, deep understanding of where that person is at. When you can understand where a person is at and what he's missing, then you can show him where to find it. The best way is not to give it to him, but to show him where to find it himself. Because very often, it's unfortunately true, and I can tell you this from experience, having dealt with people like this. Not everyone really wants. Not everyone wants to be healed. Not everyone wants to be okay. Sometimes they're too far gone in their guilt that they feel that they ought to just, you know, leave the world, die, that they don't deserve to live. It's very unfortunate that that happens, but it does. And we can see that the suicide rates over COVID have skyrocketed. It's not just COVID, believe me. It's not just the illnesses. It's the loneliness, and it's the isolation. It's the inability to see beyond the moment, inability to see the loftiness of one's own potential, the loftiness of one's own soul, that brings a person to despair, and it's a very unfortunate thing. So, what a true healer needs to do is he needs to uplift the person, and but you can uplift the person either by doing it to the person or by letting the person, leading the person to find that for themselves. If you do it for the person, that it works once, maybe even works twice. Maybe it won't need to work ever again. That's fine. The refuah, the healing will remain. But in most cases, if you tell the person where to find the treasure themselves, then they can get it whenever they need it. And that's the way, really, that's the clue here that the Ba'al Shem Tov is talking about. That little aleph that we started off talking about, the word aleph, first of all, the tiny letter aleph means that you have to get into the mindset of that person. You have to reduce yourself from your level to the level of that person in order to be able to see what it is that they need from the innermost depth that they're in. The word aleph itself, where's my screen here, my whiteboard, just one second. The word aleph itself, let's clear all these drawings. The word aleph itself is I'll just write it as a pay like this. The word aleph itself means to teach, right? It means to teach. La aleph is to teach. Um, okay, let me show you a word combination. The word aleph is related to the same letters, but in different order, right? The reverse order. To teach is a pele, it's a miracle. To be able to teach a person how to find out his number one. The letter aleph is the number one. How to find his number one. Like, where is he number one? Where is his or her number oneness, so to speak? Right? That's the pay over there. That's the lamed, and that's the aleph. Yes, it's just exactly the reverse. That's miraculous. It's a pele. It's a wonder. And that's what the Ba'al Shem Tov was teaching his disciples. He was teaching them, excuse me, he was teaching them that in order to be able to help a person, to show him where his treasure is in a miraculous way, you have to teach him by going down to his level, to his or her level, to find out what it is that they need and to show them where to get it. And then the person is able to essentially transcend themselves, raise themselves up to a higher level. By teaching them that thing, you're already raising them up to a higher level. You're showing them the potential, and that potential then becomes reality if they do something about it. Now, again, I have to emphasize if they do something about it, because to a very large extent, it's a partnership. It's true that you can impose a miracle from above. And there are very great tzaddikim, very great saints that do that. They impose a miracle from above, and sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes it's the only thing that'll work. But in general, it's not the way to proceed because most people are not um, able to accomplish miracles for themselves, and therefore they have no tools as to what to do when they come across such a situation again. How do they get out of it? If it was done by somebody else, that's not going to um, it's not going to help all that much. It'll help on a one-time basis, and again, it might be a lasting basis. But the way to go about it properly is with a partnership. That one teaches the other, the um, the teacher or the tzaddik or the kabbalist or whoever teaches the person how to find what it is that he needs. Now, it might require some time to point that out to the person, like who he is and where he's coming from and where he needs to go and what direction he needs to take, and so on and so forth. But without the person actually putting their foot on the road and putting one foot in front of the other, it's kind of useless exercise. There has to be some determination coming from the sick person to be able to become completely well again. Now, what I'm not saying is that the sick person is in any sense guilty, for being ill. The person is out of sync, and therefore it happens that illness occurs. Um, yes, it's self-inflicted to a very large extent, and free will is a very important part of this. And it is something that people can be taught. There's a methodology, there's an approach, there's an approach for every person is essentially different because every person has a different problem, and therefore a different path to solve that problem. But the problem has to be the approach has to be, first of all, solution focused or solution oriented. It's not to point out your faults and your foibles and your shortcomings and your lackings. That's not the way to go, because that just increases the darkness. But to point out to the person their source of light, as there's a verse that says, "Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam," God's candle is man's soul, or rather, put it the other way around: man's soul is God's candle. Right? In other words, your soul is there to light things up, and when utilized properly, that's exactly what it does. It lights things up, and that's what a good guide can do. Can direct one to the light of one's soul in order to lift you up, change your whole paradigm, it's a paradigm shift, as they call it. Matthew, I have a child that is mentally retarded. How can this be applied to her? She cannot speak or walk, communicate. Oh, that's a tough one. First of all, I sympathize with you. It must be it's very tough when you have such a situation. But um, look, never having met the child, I don't know. Um, it would be very difficult for me to say, just to give advice just without seeing the situation. But let me tell you that um, it's very rare. It's very rare that there's no possibility of communication. Yes, it's true. The child might not have been taught how to communicate, but there are ways of teaching even a child who is severely mentally, let's not call it retarded, undeveloped, um, skills in communication of a very basic sort. Now, again, I haven't seen the situation. I don't really know. I'm sure there are certain situations where that might not be possible. But I remember a friend of mine from many, 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 many years ago. A friend of mine was married to a woman who had had a child from another previous marriage. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't a child from a previous marriage. It was her brother. Her parents had passed away, and she was looking after her brother. And her brother was very, he physically was very incapacitated, and mentally he was very, very, very low, very weak. But somehow they did manage to teach him some communication skills. Um, and it's sometimes, sometimes, and I'm not saying this is the case in every case, but sometimes it can happen. That's why you may ask the question, why is it that such person is born in the first place? Well, sometimes there is a tikkun that needs to be done that is not the child's tikkun, or the person, the let's say the mentally challenged person or the physically challenged person's own tikkun. It's the tikkun of those who have to look after such a person, because looking after such a person is can be extremely difficult, extremely frustrating, and it can be a huge burden. But nevertheless, doing it with love and doing it with sincerity and doing it with light, essentially, might be the tikkun that that person or that family requires. So that soul might not be here to rectify its own things, but to rectify other souls. That's why it doesn't need to be here fully. Now, again, it's if Matthew, if you want to contact me privately, we can discuss it a little bit more. I don't want you to tell everybody your but please do feel free to get in touch with me. The next couple of weeks are going to be very difficult, as I'll be traveling, and um, I won't have much time to talk, if at all. But why don't you send me an email? I'll give you my phone number, my cell number, and we'll find a time to talk at some point in time, and I'll see if there's anything I can do to help you guys out. Um, okay. She was born almost normal. Yeah, it happens. Yeah, yeah. It must be true that we do not need to become physically able to overcome blindness to see what is worthwhile seeing. I think we can confuse this because we're so afraid of being blind. But a blind person can, in some circumstances, see more than others. That is absolutely true, Terry. In fact, there's a beautiful story from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov called "The Blind." I think it's called the blind beggar, the blind beggar story. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Look it up. Look it up on the internet. I think it. I think it might answer some of those questions as well. Um, there's actually, interestingly enough, a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, actually, my wife sent me something that someone had sent her. She teaches in a school. She teaches children with learning difficulties. Um, so she sent me this movie. It was a movie, a short movie, like a 20-minute movie that won a Pulitzer Prize, I believe, some prize. It might have been the Pulitzer Prize for the best short movie of, I think it was last year. And it's a story about a deaf girl and how her parents completely mishandle her. Not that they're cruel to her as such, but they completely like misunderstand what she's capable of. And when she gets a governess, it takes place in England, so she gets this governess who explains to them what needs to be done, and they can't be bothered with sign language. They just say, well, you have to turn a teacher to lip read. That's all they're interested in. Anyway, I could share that video with that movie with a link to that movie with anyone's interested. Just drop me an email. I'll send it to you. Or I'll just send it to the group maybe. In any event, to return to the subject that we were talking about, um, bringing down that level for a person is one approach. That's the approach of the consummate tzaddik who can bring it down to that level, but it's not always the best approach. The best approach is to enable a person to be able to find the treasure for themselves, or to be able to find that missing gate, um, in order to always be able to go through it. All right, that is the story of Vayikra, the aleph of Vayikra, and the 50th gate. Just to end this off on another somewhat esoteric Kabbalistic note. Why not? We already gone into so much of it. We might as well do a little bit more. So that 50th gate has a name. It's called Ayin, nothingness, right? Because it can't be defined. It's a level which can't be defined. It's beyond definition. The opposite of that, the opposite of Ayin, is exactly the same letters but in a different permutation. The word Ani. Ani means me, myself. Ego is the barrier to nothingness. Nothingness means I merge into the infinite, into the I, into the nothingness. I merge into infinity, essentially. Ani is exactly the opposite of that. The I, me, ego, I, me, right? The ego aspect of a person is the blockage to the ayin. In order for a person to delve into the depths of who that person is and what can be done for them, the person themselves, the guide, has to be able to come to the concept of ayin. Interestingly enough, there is a group of young people who are asked for some guidance, some advice on how to create a helpline for teenagers in trouble, many of whom perhaps suicidal or whatever it is. And so I'm supposed to be having some kind of course guidance with them, like, tell them the basic principles. I used to work for an organization called I'm Alive, suicide prevention hotline. Not work for them, I volunteered for them. As a volunteer and preventing, and you really do have to. The main thing is, and this is a point that I think I'll leave off with, the point is not to express your understanding of that person's situation. The point is to make yourself into into nothingness, so that you can hear their situation. Let them express the situation to you, rather than you impose your view of the situation upon them. And therefore, one has to come not to ani. It's not me expressing myself, but the concept of ayin, to be able to come to the nothingness within yourself in order to hear. Oh, the word klum means nothing. The word klum means nothing. Klum, or in Hebrew, chaf lamed vav mem, means nothingness. Klum, nothing. In any event, that is the idea. Um, that's the idea, ladies and gentlemen. The tikkun of healing comes about through understanding the depth of that person and then helping them to climb out of the hole that they're in order to make themselves whole with a W, right? Out of the hole with an H to make themselves whole with a W, by finding that 50th gate, and therefore moving from choler 49 up to 50. Up to 50 is bring them up to the level of ayin as well, to that level of merging in to the omnipresence and infinity, essentially, of godliness. That is the story. Okay, Any other questions? Yeah, klum and ein. Well, they used a little bit in the same sense. Yeah. Klum is like modern Hebrew more. Yeah. When you say klum, it means there's nothing there. Ein is more of it's a deeper concept. Klum means it has no attributes, it has no nothing. Ein means already it's a something of nothingness, if you want to put it that way. It's an existence of nothingness. It's a real um, egolessness. All right. Now, I forgot to mention there will not be a class next week or the week after. 50th again. Thank you. So for 2 weeks there won't be classes. There's plenty to look at on the internet. Go to, if you want to look at my videos, there's plenty of other things to look at as well. We have a channel on YouTube, Kabbalah Decoded. You can just go there if you want to look up old videos. There's I don't know, there's a lot of videos over there, certainly over 100, maybe 200 or something. Unfortunately, many of the other ones were done on a system that doesn't go on YouTube. So I don't know how I would convert them, but in any event, one of these days, yeah, it didn't record it in ways that can be uploaded to YouTube. Oh, that's right. I forgot all about it. Yes, I did. I forgot all about it. Yes. Okay. I will send you. Thank you. All righty. Have for those of you who celebrate Passover, have a great Passover, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks when we get back. All righty. All the best, everybody. Shabbat shalom. Thank you. All the best.